The Vincast gets all of its support from the many guests who appear on the podcast. And in turn, I would really appreciate you guys supporting them in their various businesses as much as you can. So, for example, I heartily encourage people to jump onto the App Store and download Vinous and start using that to log and share all of your wines. I also encourage people to get in contact with Phil Smith from the Wine Depository, which is a fantastic website, direct online selling wine store that also runs events. And very soon, my good friend Daniel Honan, who's been on the podcast a few times, is going to be launching Wine Idealist Tours. So that's going to be running tours out to the Hunter Valley. Without the support of the many guests that I have on the podcast, it wouldn't be possible to run it. So, of course, I appreciate everyone's time in appearing on the show, but also I appreciate anyone who listens to the podcast supporting them in their many businesses, because without us all supporting each other, the wine industry wouldn't be what it is. Hello and welcome to the Vincast for 2015. My name is James Gatsbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I hope you guys had a really lovely Christmas and New Year period. I know I did. I hope you spent it with some family and friends, maybe had some time off, and most importantly, open up some really nice bottles of wine. And keen to hear from you what you had and if it worked well with the food you might have had over that period. Obviously, it's great to have you on board for 2015. Really excited to have some really great guests coming up on the podcast. As always, I'm really keen to hear from you if you have some suggested topics you'd like to hear about, or if you have some guests you'd like to get on the show. I had some really great suggestions on Facebook and also Twitter. So hopefully, I'll get some of the people that you guys have you've asked for on the podcast soon. For the first episode for the year, I actually recorded an episode previous to Christmas with Peter Scudamore-Smith, Master of Wine. He was actually the second Master of Wine in Australia back in the early 90s, and he's based up in Brisbane. So again, I had a Skype call just in advance. Apologies, Brisbane is a lot louder than I thought it would be, and Peter, being a very busy man, he had some emails coming through and also some phone calls. So you might actually pick up a few things. I apologise for the quality of the sound. And Peter was discussing his background, the various involvements he's had with Australian wine, but also wine in Europe, and some of the exciting things that he's doing now. So I hope you enjoy the episode. It was a really interesting chat. I am a big admirer of Peter, and I hope you get a lot out of it. As always, keep in touch with me on Twitter and Instagram at Intrepid Wino. Subscribe to the podcast. La-di-la. We'll come back to that later. Enjoy. Peter, thank you very much for joining me today.
James, my pleasure, here in Brisbane.
How's the weather up in Brisbane today?
Well, after the cricket destroyed the Indians, overcast and quite humid.
Maybe that sums up the mood of the Indian team.
Yeah, well, actually, climate change is doing amazing things in all parts of the world. No parts untouched. We had the most incredibly hot summer in the end of autumn.
Wow.
End of spring.
And what do people tend to drink this time of year up in Brisbane?
Well, 75% of the state's consumption is white wine. Obviously, a fair part of that's in the tropics, subtropics. Tourists, I think most of the rosé consumption in this state's probably done by tourists.
Okay.
So really chill wine of any type.
Nice and fresh.
But just like the trends elsewhere in Australia, there's enormous volumes of Sauvignon Blanc and that family consumed. But the big grower is the Pinot Grigio, or light unwooded white with a bit of style rather than sweetness and sugar, and of course the Chardonnay is not a popular variety up here. It is amongst the well-travelled or more sophisticated drinker, but Yeah, just not the thing. And of course, Shiraz dominates the red consumption, really.
Are you from Queensland originally?
Yes, I'm born in the South Burnett.
Okay.
Long time ago, and I'm the son of a grazier, peanut farmer, cotton grower, and very late in his life, my father planted vines out of interest with my interests. He actually went to a vineyard which was established in Queensland in 1869.
Wow.
That's the Roma Villa property, which sadly is no longer there. Over the last few years, the owners virtually withered away. Queensland had some terrible floods in the Western Downs and the Western areas over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
That property got flooded twice in 2 years.
Oh, no.
They lost all their stocks. They lost all their history. They even lost documents, went back to the 1880s and 1890s of all their prizes they'd won in London and places like that. It's a terrible thing.
What was your sort of, I guess, your early interactions with wine that kind of gave you that inkling that set you on the path to pursue a career in wine?
I was a chemistry student at the University of South Queensland.
Yep.
And I became interested in booze generally, and probably rum in particular, as a student, because that's the drink of I guess blokes in Queensland in those times.
I certainly hope it was Bundaberg.
Yes, oh yeah, dark rum. It sent you mad. But I took an interest in the functions which were being held, particularly in the refectory, the student refectory, which at night time quite often companies from the university was out in the fringes of Toowoomba, and a lot of businesses used the facilities to hold functions. And at those functions in those days, they served wine.
Okay.
And
how did you get involved with them? Or introduced
I
them?
was a waiter, you know.
Oh, you were working, okay.
Yeah, students earn a few bucks, and
sure.
I was on a scholarship to be a teacher, actually, learning science.
Mm-hmm.
And my spare time, I was a waiter, and I used to help myself to some of the wine that was being served. And this occasion, I can recall the wines very well. It was Tyrrell's Vat 7, or Vat 8,
mm-hmm.
and Wynn's Coonawarra Shiraz. And it turned out to be a medical conference, or the local medicos meeting. And of course, if the medicos haven't been the sort of cradle of Australian wine industry in terms of consumption and proliferation of knowledge, I don't know who haven't. And this man tapped me on the shoulder one day as I was drinking Shiraz at my knockoff drink, probably way past midnight, and said, "Young fellow, if you really want to know about wine," he says, "you should come around to visit me." So I did visit him because he had a very lovely blonde daughter about my age. And we became very friendly, and I guess that was the start. And that medical fraternity really mentored me. And the dental fraternity in Toowoomba, they used to go to visits to Rutherglen. Rutherglen was the holy grail in those days, Morris, and particularly Bailey's. Bailey's had a little outpost in Queensland, in Toowoomba, amongst the dentists and the medicos. They used to love Bailey's Hermitage. And so that's really how I got interested. And then, of course, I married the daughter of a dentist. Mm-hmm. And, you have these tea parties. Well, I had a cellar party, and I was given some of the greatest wines that were around in those days. Great Western Shirazes from Priest, and
Priest.
Really
Does Priest even exist anymore?
No, but the Priest era wines, which were under Great Western Shiraz label.
Okay.
That sort of thing. Lindeman's Hunter River Porphyry is a dessert wine.
Porphyry Pearl?
No, Porphyry. Porphyry.
When I started working in wine, which is, 10 years ago now. I was at Liquorland. I think they still had Porphyry. You could still buy it.
Yeah, that's Mobile Intimates. That was the dessert wine
That's
style.
the one.
It was a Pasito style, Pasito on the vine. In other words, grapes allowed to ripen on the vine and dry out, dehydrate, and then make this unbotrytis affected, late harvested sweet Semillon.
Yep.
So
it's a very common style in Italy.
There was a great wine made by Penfolds, 404, I think it was, in 1960. That is a collector's item, not as big a collector's item as the Bin 68, but the same genre in the same era. Mm-hmm. Just that many people don't drink sweet and dessert wine, so I guess that's why it's less significant.
Did you find yourself responding to particular styles or particular regions early on?
No, look, I was like a kid in a toy shop. I had my mouth open, and anything that would be poured down it, I'd ask the questions and appreciate it. I developed great mentors. Victoria's famous man was Douglas Seabrook. He was a mentor. Max Lake in The Hunter was a mentor. Len Evans in The Hunter was a mentor. And the only one living today, Stewie Anderson, was also a mentor. So those sort of four men serially poured good wine down my throat and said, "Here, sonny, listen to this, and you need to try this, and you need to meet that bloke." And
so you studied science to become a teacher. Did you work as a teacher after university, or did you follow a different career path?
I was sort of closely, but not totally corrupt in the what was the country party and now the National Party, because I came from Joe country, so I was able to swap departments. I can't say how that happened, but I swapped departments. So I was supposed to be a teacher, and I ended up in the Department of Prime Industries as a trainee food scientist.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Applied my love of science in the food area, and ended up a principal food scientist.
Did your kind of interest in wine have anything to do with that?
Yes and no. There was a man in our department who was assigned to get involved in wine.
Yep.
And so he had 5 years head start on me. And it turned out that he wasn't accepted as a trainee wine judge. And I got the Guernsey after him. So he sort of was told by the authorities at the Royal Show that no, he didn't have the palate to go on. And so I started to get involved in wine. And in parallel to that, I was very active in wine drinking circuit. I was very active in...
Fundamental.
Well, I did a lot of options games. I used to be an options game winner here. 2 out of 3 years running when they had those national options games, I was a Queensland winner. So I used to spend a lot of time guessing and working out why a wine tasted how it did. And so, yeah, I was sort of paralleling that with that interest. And then in 1980, I decided to become a qualified winemaker. So I became a distance education student at Charles Sturt University.
Okay. In terms of like learning how to assess wine, I would think it's probably pretty different back then to how it is now. How did that? Did you learn that before you started the winemaking course?
Yes, because I'd been a judge for 3 years.
How were you like? What was there any kind of formal training? I know that Len Evans was someone who was very instrumental in kind of training, particularly judges. Obviously, that's part of the reason that the Len Evans tutorial exists. But yeah. How did you approach it?
Well, I just had a background in food science, so I was actually working with taste panels.
Yeah.
So I developed a rigor for food assessment, and wine's just one subgroup of that. So
okay.
I was running taste panels, being a part of taste panels. I understood the statistics beside results you get out of taste panels. Research and development of food products I was thoroughly involved in. So the group I worked with had a full-time sensory specialist, and I was one of the sort of graduate people involved in that program. And we'd have taste panels going every day, and we learned a lot about the various types of taste panels and how to assess products without being biased. If you know what I mean. So,
yeah, I do actually. Because I did the master's degree at the University of Adelaide in wine business. We did a whole component on testing, like triangle testing and stuff like that. Where you have three samples, two are the same and one's different, to determine which one was different. That kind of thing.
Yeah, no, well, that was regularly done. I'm also a qualified coffee taster, so I've worked in Nestle in Switzerland in the area of coffee, and I've also worked in France in coffee, and Belgium and Holland in coffee. Visited a lot of producing areas. Of course, New Guinea is the closest one to Australia, which grows marvellous coffee.
Sure.
So I was virtually a sensory specialist when I got involved in wine, and then I developed that. I guess a lot more intensely because I actually liked the product. You can become an avocado sensory specialist, but you can only eat so many avocados. You can't collect them.
You can't keep them.
Yeah, and there's not too many great varieties of avocado, whereas the varieties of wine and wine styles is just innumerous really around the world.
So how did you find studying winemaking by distance with Charles Sturt? Obviously, probably the most important winemaking institution in the country.
I really enjoyed it, but just about killed me because I maintained a full-time job and studied full-time. I was carrying 3 and 4 subjects a semester.
Sure.
I lost a marriage through it.
Okay.
But my kids still love me. And of course, they're really enjoying. I'm down to a second generation now, and I guess they'll enjoy wine just as much as my kids have. And they've had a quite incredible, I guess, not indoctrination, but part of the learning curve, I suppose, or part of the journey that I guess.
Osmosis.
Yeah, but see, you've got to look at our background. I came from a very boring English scottocracy background that only had the 3 veggies and overcooked meat and had never heard of olive oil and spices, chilies, and didn't know what lemongrass was, and you know what I mean? Sort of really, I had a diet as a kid of mutton, and more mutton 3 times a day.
Yeah.
So, my first trip to Europe, which was in 1985 when I won the Vin de Champagne Award, was a real eye-opener, right? I'd eaten a lot of really interesting French and Italian foods in Australia and probably 10 years prior to that, but really Europe really opened my eyes to think that the geography is so close, Britain's so close to France, yet, as a country in Australia, we were so far away.
It's interesting, I think about that, and I think about whether or not, I guess the difference with continental Europe, France, Italy, to a certain extent, Spain, those are countries where they're producing the wine, and it sort of makes sense that the wine and the food would sort of go together. Whereas in England and the United Kingdom, because the wine is not coming from there, there's no kind of correlation at all towards the cuisine. So there's probably less, just, I guess, natural kind of food and wine pairing or understanding about how they coexist. I guess, food and wine were looked at as separate entities.
Well, I guess my forebears came from Berkshire, so I guess they were close to the whiskey industry or to the cider industry and what they were to the wine industry.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I guess to a limited stage, a lot of the recipes of Western England and Northern England included, jugged hare or use of cider. Certainly, wine didn't prevail at all. It just wasn't thought of.
It's really funny. Like you talk about stuff like jugged hare and mutton. I watch like maybe TV shows from maybe the 60s, 70s, that kind of thing. Stuff like Monty Python, and they make references to these these foods, these very British foods that I had no idea what they were. I remember reading The Hobbit and the trolls having an argument, like discussing mutton, and I had to ask my mum, "What's mutton?" I'd never even heard of it before. Was there any kind of much of an ethnic presence where you were sort of when you were younger? Because I know that like in Melbourne and Sydney and Adelaide as well, I guess, there are a lot of Italians who are coming post World War II, and they were kind of introducing their cuisines and stuff like that.
Generally, no, except with a broad brush, you're talking British. So you had,
sure,
that doesn't include the Irish because that was separate, but you had, Scottish, English, and then maybe some Irish input. But there were pockets, and the pockets were very inbred. So that inbreeding was a means of maintaining the funds, the assets of families. They didn't want anybody to dilute them. So
sure,
had German, pockets of German origin, the same way as the Barossa Valley was settled. There's parts of Eastern Australia where you have a lot of German, German settlers.
Yeah.
The rest of it, no, it really wasn't. It was subsistence. It really wasn't. There were no TV shows. There were no wine books. There were no food books. There were no reality shows. It was very hard to get a book on cooking. Margaret Fulton was the first, and it was just good old Aussie standard stodgy cooking. So, and until Len Evans started off the Wine Information Bureau in the 60s, for instance, there was no culture. Unless you came out of families who had a lot of that existed in Victoria and to some extent in parts of New South Wales. Very rarely, other than the Western Downs, where the squatters there were sheep people who'd come from the Macquarie Plains, which eventually come from the Liverpool Plains, which means they'd come from Sydney, where they'd, some of the forebears had a background in cooking or had, parents who actually didn't only drink whiskey, they actually bought claret, and I guess the first real influence that my family had was during the big wool boom of the 50s. All the stock and station agents, the Elders, McTaggarts, all those sorts of companies, actually used to sell everything. Like you'd get your barbed wire, your fence posts, your sheep dip, and your champagne all in the same delivery.
Sounds like Costco.
Yeah, but a lot of stuff. But the champagne brand, which was favoured, was Veuve Clicquot.
Sure.
Because Elders was a distributor of Veuve Clicquot for 50, 60 years from the late 1890s onwards.
Yeah.
And when people made a lot of money in the bush, they enjoyed it. And a lot of those during that wool boom of the 50s, a lot of champagne was drunk at Christmas time.
So once you'd finished the winemaking degree, obviously it was a big struggle. What were your sort of the next movements?
Well, I then decided I wanted to become a master of wine.
Wow. Okay. So how long ago was that?
Oh, that was early 80s. So I was watching the boom and bust of the Australian wine industry because we went through this huge overproduction of red grapes in the Hunter Valley and in areas further south. There was a vine pull in 1986. Not that long ago.
This is the we had another boom and bust in the 90s, didn't we?
Yes, and of course we're still suffering from that. But yes, in the 80s there was too much red around. And the Upper Hunter particularly, they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres established that were overproducing. So they all just went to nothing, really. They just let go. And of course we know in South Australia people were paid $3,000 to pull out an acre of vines. I guess in the Barossa Valley today, really...
That's good money in those days.
Yeah, but it wasn't. You think about the value of a hectare of...
Well, yeah,
50-year-old Shiraz today, it's worth
of course, now
$1,000. I get given $3,000 to pull it out. That's just how I guess, narrow-minded and nearsighted the authorities were in that era. So no, I looked around. I wasn't making much wine then. The Granite Belt was really struggling from lack of finance, because in an area which is small or out of the usual, because everybody expected the Granite Belt to be making huge full-bodied wines in Queensland because it was hot. Little did they know that at 1,000 metres you make quite fine, medium to light-bodied Cabernets and Shiraz and Chardonnay, you know. And so that area struggled for a long time to develop. So I spent some time there. I actually was, in 1988 and 89, I was consulting winemaker to one of the larger properties in that area. But really, I really struggled to find my niche. I thought many times, I love living in Queensland, I love living in Brisbane, but should I travel? Should I go to Western Australia? Because it was what was going on in Western Australia was really exciting. Margaret River was just starting to form, and other areas south. I had lots of friends going over there.
That was post back-to-back Jimmy Watson trophies from Cape Mentelle Cabernet, wasn't it?
Exactly. I had an influence in both those results because at the time I was a judge at Melbourne Wine Show.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And yes, it was a very controversial wine. The first vintage, it was really herbal, right? Today, you know, really, really herbal. But it was just so different, and it just really underwrote the fact that the wines of Margaret River, the Cabernet wines of Margaret River, are so amazingly great. You know what I mean? So if you plant Cabernet Margaret River, you're going to have a certain standard anyway, just because of the climate.
Sure.
And if you don't bugger up the winemaking, you're going to have a very decent wine regardless. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Such a reliable climate. And they always have water available. I guess on the eastern coast, we don't have water availability like they have in the west. So yes, so that was really a watershed for me. I enjoyed my food science, I enjoyed my coffee skills, but I really wanted to get involved in the Australian wine industry.
Okay, and what kind of prompted the idea of becoming an MW? Like, how many MWs were there in the world, I guess, at that point?
Not a lot. I'd been an avid reader of Decanter. And
Right.
had all these great stories written by MWs or other, you know, very famous people. Particularly Andrew Jefford came to mind. He was always a very agile scribe. At the same time, there was a very famous organisation in Melbourne called the Viticultural Society of Victoria.
Which is they're the ones who are involved with the Melbourne Wine Show.
No, just that was really the old school of great wine drinking in Victoria. They were the people that pull the corks on Lafitte, Latour, Mouton, Yquem, Guigal, Côte Gironnes, etc.
Right.
They were the people that met every month, and really, you know, that they were the people who were the forebears of great drinking in Melbourne, really. And I used to read about their reports and get awfully jealous. And I said, look, there's only one way to do this, and that I need to go to London and experience these wines for myself.
Sure.
And that's what I did in 1989. And by then, Michael Hill-Smith had become Australia's first master wine, 1987. And he'd gone to London not to become a master wine. He'd gone there to do a cordon bleu or similar cooking class, because he decided that he wanted to get into the cuisine side, because he came out of a great wine family. And
very much so.
Yes, and he'd done something similar but actually different by wishing to sort of immerse himself in the wine trade in the UK, and I guess he was sort of sorting out where his life would go after that. So yeah, that was an amazing experience, and of course I failed my first year Master of Wine exams because I really didn't get it. And you know, it's a qualification that takes a bit to get. But I was tasting in 3 places on a Saturday, and I had lots of mentors, and there's a couple of Australians also studying.
Were you working as well?
Yes, part-time. I did a little bit of retail work, a little bit of writing. The second year I went back to London, I was actually on a Rosemount travelling scholarship. So when a bloke gets a few quid given to him, he didn't have to work as hard. But that allowed me to actually jump across the channel on weekends and go to Champagne and to go to Loire and places like that to understand and meet people. And just understand how the French industry worked. It's just so different from Australia.
Sure. And when did you get the Master of Wine qualification certification?
1991.
1991. Were you the second?
Second, yeah.
Second in Australia. Okay. And then what was next after getting such an illustrious, 2 letters added to your name? What were your plans then? Was it to go out, and consult and have your own business in that kind of field?
It took a while. I started getting involved in the Swedish wine market.
Systembolaget.
Yeah. Well, more so Vin and Sprit, because there was a man based in Brisbane who virtually owned the Swedish, from the Australian point of view, owned the Swedish market. He dominated the sales of Australian wine up there, which actually accumulated at 9 million litres a year. And he had 2 wines called Aussie Red and Aussie White. And they were made, he had such big volumes that they were made in 3 different wineries in Australia. The blending, or the composition, the supply.
Right.
3 different wineries. One came out of the Bortley. One came out of what is now called Qualia, but in those days it was Salisbury Estate. And the third one came out of Kingston Estate. So you had 3 really big family wineries contributing to what ended up at a total of 9 million litres. So I worked with that man for a while. And then the European Union came along and started to sort of tug at that monopoly, because both Vin and Sprit, which was a wholesale monopoly, a production monopoly, and Systembolaget, which was a retail monopoly, was starting to be disintegrated because of the competition. Because there would have been a lot of European companies and a lot of American companies would love to have access to that market.
Sure.
So no, I was the blender and the master wine who stood in front of those wines, and I used to visit Sweden regularly to assist with the development and the proliferation of products. In the end, we actually had about 7 different products. But we had the number 1 selling Aussie White and Aussie Red. We used to sell for 50 Swedish crowns a bottle, and that was the bottom end. That was cheapest Australian wine in the selection. Used to go into a returnable, resealable screw cap bottle. In other words, people would buy their wine in a screw cap bottle and return the empties, and it'd be refilled.
Refilled, not sort of taken away and washed and rebottled. They actually, so it's like swords.
Yeah.
Do you have swords?
Yeah, refilled. I know. We have swords up here, not to a great degree, but it's a top idea.
And then how did you eventually start the consulting business?
Well, yeah, in 1996, I just went off in my own direction, and there was a lot of expansion in grape production in Queensland. The government decided to have a minister for wine. There was all sorts of incentives and ridiculous developments, and I just immersed myself in them and got involved in various projects, many of which actually have not survived. I think over the last 5 years has been a very, very tough road for a lot of companies, and we're still seeing it happen all over Australia. The number of wine brands which are doing it very tough, or barely making enough money through cash flow to keep assets alive. And I guess the only way that it has grown or maintained itself, of course, as seeing that the two big supermarkets sort of suck up the surplus, and at the same time seen a lot of bulk export out of Australia. Now, while I was working with the Swedish market, I also became an industry broker. I don't know whether it's good to say this or not, but I was responsible for a lot of the import of red wine that came into this country in 1996, 97, because we had a shortage of wine in that time.
Wait, there was a shortage. Where was the wine coming from?
Well, a couple of my colleagues who are also industry brokers bought a lot of wine out of Argentina.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's where I was thinking.
Well, no, I didn't participate in the Argentina importation. That was mainly 1995. I participated in 1996. And my importations, which was 1 million litres, by two different companies in Australia, imported 1 million litres each. That's 99 containers each. Was from Spain. So
right,
southern Spain.
Sure.
Valencia.
So was this to be blended or bottled? And
Yeah, Matthew Lang, Orlando Cooler Bar casks.
Wow, those are names I have not heard for a long time.
Yeah, and they were just short of Australian wine was just a huge short supply, and companies like Hardy's refused to bring in imported wine, so they just closed some brands for a couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
Or declassified some wine that was going into higher levels. And yes, and you had to nominate on the package to the nearest 2%, the percentage of other country wine. So some bag and box products were 100% Spanish wine, others were 87%, Spanish wine, and 13% Australian wine, and that sort of thing. Very detailed.
People didn't have too much issue with it?
No, well, it's really the bag-in-box wine sells as a commodity and at a price. So I guess there was just no choice, really. Some brands just had to, some companies wanted to maintain their market share. They just had to import. And you see this in New Zealand. It's been going on in New Zealand for 20 years because, the premium market in New Zealand is a lot higher than the basic market where people just want to buy alcohol at a very low price.
Sure.
Right? So you'll see a lot of Chilean and Argentinian wine in the New Zealand market at times when domestic prices are high for their grapes,
Sure.
Sauvignon Blanc brings $4 to $5 a litre in the bulk market around the world.
That's pretty good.
You can buy Spanish wine at 90 euro cents a litre. So it doesn't take long to work out where the supply might come from.
In terms of what you're doing now, how did that kind of eventuate?
So totally different, yeah. So I gave up my broking business when I went out as a private consultant, just got involved in winemaking.
Yeah.
By the way, I've never totally lost my broking. So I still broke from time to time, buy and sell grapes and buy and sell wine. That's because the phone rings and people say, can you supply this or can you give me a price for that? So those relationships extend around the world, actually. And, I'm more interested observer there these days than a participant. But no, you just evolve. The thing is that as a consultant, you're the first one to be put off a project. If things go tough, right, you're gone. And I spent a lot of time being a non-executive director on a few wine boards, particularly managed investment schemes, which are in many areas pretty nasty things in those days, but a lot of people lost money. I'm still involved in some that actually have made money or are there today. So I was very happy with my board roles, but that's sort of a lesser area because I've just evolved my business to remain afloat, to remain relevant, to remain, a specialist. I call myself more a wine professional these days than a a professional winemaker, a professional viticulturist, even though I've had activity in viticulture and winemaking.
Sure.
And advising people on styles of wines. I've just diversified my business, and I remarried 3 years ago, and my wife retired, and she learned Italian, and that took us into wine and food tourism in Europe.
Which is, in fact, where I actually met you 2 years ago. I was pretty excited when I found out, I think just before I was going to be visiting a great Châteauneuf-du-Pape producer in View Telegraph, that I'd be joining Peter Scudamore-Smith, and obviously I was familiar with your name, and I think at that time I was aspiring to become a master of wine myself, and I thought, oh my god, this is so exciting, and it was obviously it was a lovely visit there, and it was great to meet you on that occasion.
Yes, well, it was nice to see another Aussie in a very French environment, and it's also nice to see English spoken, even though I am now back learning French, or back polishing my French. But it's taken till 2015 for me to actually conduct a wine and food tour in France. Because my wife spoke Italian, we've specialised in Italy for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And now France is starting to generate interest by Australians who wish to, outside the industry. It's not a tour for specialists, it's normally a tour for people who normally don't go and conduct a tour. So it's a small group. We share the same wines, the same foods, and I take them into places you normally can't access.
Well, particularly, I've noticed you go to some pretty exotic areas of the wine world. Even for wine professionals, they kind of would drool at some of the wineries you visit and some of the places you're eating and what you get to experience. Like particularly down in Sicily. Sicily is such an exciting, dynamic part of the world for wine.
It is, and it's something that I guess the Australians have overlooked because I suppose many native Sicilians who have now relocated to Australia over the last 100 years took a long time to embrace their own culture and their own grape varieties, and now that's happening quite quickly. But I guess Australians didn't see Sicily as a great place to visit. Some were a bit scared by the word mafia, which is probably not an issue for a tourist. It might be a domestic issue, but certainly not for people visiting the island. And yes, I guess we've certainly provided examples year on year now that it's not exotic, it's just actually a nice place, and the food styles are very high standard and the wine styles are very high standard.
Particularly relative to the price.
Yes.
That was my experience when I was there.
Yeah, well, my tour of, my 10-day tour of Toscana and Piemonte is $7,000, and my same tour for the same period of time and the same standards is $1,000 cheaper in Sicily.
And what have you got coming up in 2015? You're taking some more tours?
Yes, for the first time in my life, I've got 4 tours, 2 in France and 2 in Italy. The French tour took off, and then it was so successful I've had to put a second tour on.
The same tour or to different areas?
Same tour, but it'll be some and different properties in the second tour. So it's a repeat of the first tour.
Okay.
4 days apart.
Which French regions do you go to?
I go to Champagne, Burgundy and Rhone, sure. and all regions within those regions. And then in 2016, with another high-end developer, I'm in the process of putting together an 18-day tour, which will include Bordeaux and Loire and Chablis.
Far out. That's pretty exciting.
It's a lot of work, but it's got to be profitable for me as a business, so it has to be contained so that the margins are tight, and there's not too many middle people in between, otherwise there's nothing in it for anybody.
Yeah.
A lot of it's maintained through relationships, and I really like those. I really, really highly regard them.
But you're also, involved in a number of other things. I bumped into you a little while ago. You were down for a big Italian tasting in Melbourne.
Yes, I keep a lot of relationships with the Italian community and the French community, so particularly through high-end Italian retail, Italian restaurants, and the same with French retail and French restaurants. So that's where my market is, people who aspire to see where Burgundy's grown and made, and people who want to go to a champagne house or want to go and look over the Mediterranean in Taormina and drink some Nerello Mascalese for the first time. That sort of stuff. So, only about 20% of Australians who travel to Europe are that aspirational at that level, and they're the people I like to meet.
Mm-hmm. But if people are interested in joining one of your tours in the coming years, what's the best way for them to find out more and keep in touch with you?
Two ways. They can register on my website for my electronic news, or go to my uncorkedandcultivated.com.au website and download the itineraries.
Right, okay. And people can follow you on social media as well?
Yes, I'm found on Instagram, Delectable, Twitter and Facebook.
And it generally is the same. Your Twitter handle is Uncorked Cultivate.
Uncorked and Cultivate, yeah. Uncorked and Cultivate for Twitter. And Pinterest, Instagram is Uncorked and Cultivated.
Facebook?
Facebook, Uncorked and Cultivated.
So it's pretty much across the board.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Brand.
Well, yeah, and hopefully at some point in the near future, maybe we can bump into each other again over in Europe.
I look forward to it. It's a wonderful place to visit.
And I really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining me today, Peter.
Well, James, I really think it's a pleasure to be a contributor, and wish you really well with your podcasts.
Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you guys for joining me on this week's episode of the Vincast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let Peter know or let me know. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at IntrepidWino, and you can also follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. You can like me on Facebook, facebook.com/IntrepidWino. But come and visit me at my website, intrepidwino.com, where you can get all the previous episodes of the podcast, as well as lots and lots of various writing on there, and you'll find a link to iTunes and to Stitcher where you can subscribe to the podcast. And if you do enjoy the podcast and would like to share it, I would really appreciate it if you could give me a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, because it really helps me out. But until next time, bye.